This local attorney says he and others lived in fear of the accused Capitol Gazette gunman for years.
And he blames gaps in Maryland law for leaving them powerless. Now he says it's time for change.
And that's what has to come out of this, or all those people died for absolutely no reason.
Tonight, the News 4 I-Team asks the experts and some of those closest to this case why law enforcement couldn't do more.
Investigative reporter Jodie Fleischer joins us live with the changes they say have to happen. Jodie?
Doreen, in Maryland, in order for electronic communication to be considered harassing, it has to be sent and received, like an email. Experts tell us that's just one of the reasons these hundreds of tweets the suspect posted online for years did not count as threats, even though the people he targeted definitely felt threatened.
He would say that he wanted them to kill themselves, that they would be dripping in blood.
In all his years as an attorney, Brennan McCarthy had never seen a suspect like Jared Ramos.
I knew he was going to do something violent. I just knew it.
McCarthy battled him in court on behalf of a client named Lori. Ramos pleaded guilty to harassing her by email in 2011. But after he served his probation, she says his threats moved to Twitter.
He never came right out and threatened to kill me. He did it in such a way that I knew exactly what he was saying, and nobody could do anything about it.
Maryland's stalking and harassment law says electronic communication has to be sent to a person and be received by the person, meaning threatening language posted online doesn't always count, even if it references violence.
But you're not saying, I'm going to come to your house tomorrow and kill you.
And you think that was not an accident or a coincidence?
No, he had read those laws.
The Capitol newspaper reported on Lori's case, making the journalists a Twitter target too. Records show Ramos started tweeting about McCarthy, the newspaper's attorney, and even local judges who ruled the paper had not defamed Ramos with its coverage.
I was scared for my client and for anyone basically that he identified in that Twitter feed.
He says Ramos chose his words carefully, tweeting about blood in the boardroom at the newspaper, posting "Journalist hell awaits," and about murdering a reporter's career. The newspaper called police in 2013.
I think our citizens expect us to be able to handle someone like him.
Kevin Davis had just started as Anne Arundel County Police Chief when a detective wrote this report. He'd looked at Ramos's criminal history, checked that he had no registered weapons, and read through that Twitter account.
He did not, according to our existing laws, go far enough for us to do something about him.
The detective wrote he did not believe that Mr. Ramos was a threat to employees, noting Ramos had not attempted to enter the Capitol newspaper building and didn't send direct threatening correspondence. The newspaper opted not to pursue any charges, describing that as putting a stick in a beehive.
If we don't have the tools to help someone with that problem, we end up walking away telling folks, call us when something happens, and that's too late.
Several shots have been fired. You're responding to the active shooter.
5 years went by before police say Ramos burst through the doors of the Capitol newspaper and gunned down 5 employees. Ramos has pleaded not guilty. His attorney declined to comment about the tweets.
Everyone knew he was a danger. And we just don't have the tools right now to stop him from doing what he's doing before he does it. That's the problem.
McCarthy says he's making it his mission to change Maryland law so police can act on earlier behavior before it escalates. Right now, police require clear, directly threatening language to make an arrest.
In many cases that we've seen, there is not a direct threat.
And threat assessment expert Marisa Rendazzo says the overwhelming majority of mass shooters do reveal hints about their plans, even if the language isn't specific.
That's where we could do a better job of changing those laws to allow law enforcement much greater latitude to investigate.
Davis says Maryland should also ban people who have threatened, stalked, or harassed someone from legally buying a gun, like Ramos did.
When these people are identified, everyone looks themselves in the mirror and they look at each other and they say, I'm not surprised. Then that means something's wrong with the system.
Maryland has passed a law against cyberbullying, but it only applies to minors. McCarthy says adults need the same protection and that officers must follow up, even if a crime hasn't been committed yet. What mechanism is there in place to keep watch on him to make sure he's not a threat in the future?
None. There's your frightening answer. None.
Now that's something that could change in the coming months, at least in Anne Arundel County. Coming up tomorrow at 5, we go one-on-one with the current police chief about these issues and others he's taking a look at in the wake of the shooting. Jim, a detective's main job is to identify and solve crimes that have already happened, not to predict whether a suspect could pose a danger in the future. But experts tell us that's what officers are being asked to do more and more often, and they don't always have the tools and training to do it.
We're responding to the active shooter at Triple Investigate with tag team. At least 10 shots heard.
It floored me. This can't keep happening.
Anne Arundel County Police Chief Timothy Altamari knew it could happen in his community. What he didn't know was just how many people were afraid this man might do it.
Command copy, suspect in custody per PD.
Jared Ramos now charged with murdering 5 newspaper employees inside their office at the Capital Gazette. 5 years earlier, this police report documented why an Anne Arundel detective did not believe Mr. Ramos was a threat to employees there.
I trusted and still trust his judgment, you know.
The newspaper had called police to investigate months of threatening language in Ramos's Twitter feed, but ultimately decided not to pursue charges. The detective noted Ramos had not attempted to enter the Capitol newspaper building or sent direct threatening correspondence.
I'd be curious how many people in his world did they interview that knew him, whether it be his parents, friends, family, neighbors.
Matt Doherty used to run the National Threat Assessment Center for the Secret Service and notes the report outlines many investigative steps the detective did take, but does not mention any such interviews. Doherty says finding a trusted source within the suspect's circle is critical.
You look at these targeted violence cases, very rarely does somebody make a direct threat.
But he says they almost always exhibit warning signs, and if those behaviors aren't identified and stopped, they can escalate. He says it's unfair and potentially dangerous to ask law enforcement to predict future behavior without extensive training.
They can't go it alone. They have to have the full cooperation of the judicial system, social workers, mental health community.
Plus, he says Ramos may not have been a threat back when the newspaper called.
The one thing that people have to keep in mind about threat assessment, you can close a case, but it needs to be monitored.
Monitoring Ramos's later tweets could have revealed what Doherty calls textbook pre-attack behaviors, like a half-dozen references to the attack at the Charlie Hebdo newspaper in Paris. And this tweet, where Ramos shared a Capital Gazette article on mass shootings, commenting that it cannot happen at the newspaper's old address because there was no one left there to shoot.
Is that a red flag?
Absolutely.
Do most average police departments know all of this?
Unfortunately, no.
Chief Altamari says that's something he's going to change.
We're going to hire an employee this year to do nothing but monitor maybes on social media.
He decided to create that position after the school shooting in Parkland, Florida in February. His department gets at least a threat call a day, 183 just in the schools last year. And he says most threats now involve social media.
I would like to see a strengthening of the statutes as it deals with threats. For us to be able to get a criminal charge, the threat made by a person has to be extremely graphic, pointed, narrow. I'm going to come kill you.
He says his department's thorough review of its response to the shooting will also include its handling of the threats investigation 5 years ago to see if any policy changes are needed.
And you'll see us maybe tweak that to say officers need to go clap eyes on somebody and talk to them.
He also plans to approach his fellow police chiefs about legislation to give officers more latitude when investigating threats to better protect the public.
I got to be honest, I'm frustrated every day by what we can't do. We can't guarantee anyone's safety in this world. I wish I could, but tell us, we'll move heaven and earth to help you.
There is no record of the newspaper ever following up with police, even though those tweets continued for several years. The chief says victims should keep calling back if language escalates and raises concern. Ramos has pleaded not guilty in the Capital Gazette shooting. His public defender declined to comment.